This is like the ominous silence before something happens in a science fiction movie.
I think it's quick.
Okay,
Get behind the
ready to go?
chainsaws.
Yeah.
Okay. Next slide. Well, good morning. This is the long good morning to everyone. And thank you for joining the Maritime Task Force as they share what are their very initial findings and their recommendations. And you're going to see some exciting ideas for positive change and really some forward-thinking actions for the districts. The task force this morning will be breaking out after their presentations into their work groups for about a half an hour and then returning to report out to the full group. All of that will be recorded and it will be up on the Maritime Task Force website, as is the prior meeting and as well as the work group meetings. The public, we welcome you this morning. If you have questions, please send them to boards@annapolis.gov with the title Maritime Task Force. We're going to be having a Planning Commission work session this coming Thursday evening, the 4th of February at 7 p.m. If you have comments that you would like sent to the Planning Commission or want to make comments at the Commission, please send those directly to the Planning Commission. And with that said, we have the Mayor, we have Alderman Arnett, we have Alderwoman Tierney. So Mr. Mayor, I'm going to kick it over to you. Next slide.
Well, welcome everybody. It does feel like Colorado out there for all you guys that are in Colorado. I want to thank everybody for being here and all the hard work that they're doing, all the volunteerism that goes into making this thing happen. I especially want to thank Alderman Arnett. This is his baby and it's his initiative, and I want to thank his leadership on this. And of course, Eileen for hurting everybody. Because of you, because of the efforts of the City Dock Action Committee, we are proving that when you get people around the table, when they talk to each other, they look each other in the eye, that you can get things solved. You can come up with a good end product that everybody agrees on. We truly think that we all want the same thing in this room. We want the quality of life that we all came to Annapolis for, or that we all grew up in Annapolis with. And I think, you know, this is an effort to make sure we maintain that and grow in the direction that we want to grow our city, that keeps it magic and keeps it special. And again, because of you, this city council are on the short list for the Nobel Peace Prize, because we got 50 people to agree here. We got nearly 100 people to agree on the City Dock Action Committee. We're looking pretty good so far, all because of you. So I want to say thank you. And then I want to hand it over to Alderman Arnett.
So what do we have in common between the City Dock and this? Could it be Eileen?
Lots of people agreeing.
I know. So I want to thank Eileen. I'm excited to hear what you had to say today, and I will be brief. I also want to thank Alderman Arnett. Turn it over to Alderwoman Tierney.
Oh, wow, that was quick.
That's it.
That was quick. Thank you, Eileen, for doing this and your heroic efforts on the City Dock Action Plan, et cetera. But I just want to mention how it does relate to the City Dock Action Committee and these efforts. One of the most interesting and beautiful documents that the city has done is called the Annapolis City Dock Cultural Landscape Report. And it was done September 11th, 2018. I don't know how much distribution it got because it was just a draft. I do know that the City Dock Action Committee did have it in their list of references. And I just wanted you to just bear with me as I read some of the language in the report, speaking of the maritime narrative and the loss basically of the maritime use. And one of your objectives is how do we, define that or redefine as the economics might force us to. But in this report, it reads City Dock's essential defining characteristic that contributes to its role in the National Historic Landmark is its water-land relationship. Its cultural landscape depends upon the integral, visible interrelationship of water and land at the city's water edge. And to preserve that vital relationship, the area between those buildings and the water needs to be open and unobstructed both physically and visually. And that's what we do have in the concept in the plan at City Dock, is to elevate that vista, if you will, because the intent of the whole Nicholson plan in the historic district is all those wonderful radial streets from the high elevations. They all lead to water and an unobstructed view of that water. So that's my priority, is to celebrate that. And I'm so glad that you have formed this group, and we'll talk about all other things, but I just want to stress how much I value the waterfront at City Dock and your effort in coming up with a wonderful plan for City Dock. Thanks.
Ellie, thanks so much for your inspiration. Do we have any other of the older persons on the call? If not, we are going to move to our city manager, David Gerald.
Thank you, Eileen. Good morning, everybody. I just want to say thanks to all of you too for participating and for spending time and your effort on this project. Eileen has asked me to talk about the purpose and building consensus. So as you all know, the task force is comprised of residents, maritime businesses and tenants, property owners, public interest, environmental groups, all working together in an amazing fashion, led by Eileen, to craft the future direction for three things. First, strengthening and supporting Annapolis's maritime industry. Second is creating opportunities for the community to access and experience Annapolis's waterfront and waterways. And third, ensuring a sustainable future for maritime districts. So that's what everybody is targeted and focused on, is achieving those three purposes. As I said, you've done a tremendous job in the past few months working on this, and we really appreciate that. We look to you all today when you meet as working teams to continue to press forward, to find common ground as teams, to reach consensus on the strategic approach the task force is presenting, and to agree to move to the next phase of evaluation. So we all know that Eileen is a master at building consensus. Those are her words, those are her goals, and those are her objectives for the meeting today. So again, thank you for everything that you've done thus far and for your future efforts. And I'm going to turn it over to Sally Nash now to talk about the comprehensive plan. So thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Sally Nash, Planning and Zoning. I just wanted to reiterate that this task force, the work of this task force is an integral part of the city's comprehensive plan that is updated about every 10 years. We've been working on this one, which we are now calling our 2040 plan, for about 2 years. I've handed over to the very capable Eric Lashinsky to lead, and he's been doing a great job. But we all know how important the maritime industry is to the city. It was recognized in the 2009 plan. and it will be recognized in our updated plan. Thank you, Julian. We also want to look at strategies, not just for the long term, but things that we can implement right away and help the industry. We know that there's things that need to happen right away, maybe not as big as a comprehensive rezoning of all maritime properties, but other things we can do to incentivize the kind of projects and amenities that will improve the quality of life for everyone in the city of Annapolis. Thank you.
Sally, thanks so much. Next slide, please. I just want to make sure that everyone is up to date on where we are in the process. There's been a tremendous amount of activity going on. We are, if you look at it, that second blue circle, the end of January. In the interim, through the holidays and in January, there's been outreach to the community, to the industry, to the owners, to residents, as well as a lot of meetings amongst the teams themselves. So after today's meeting, when you go down to those orange circles, there'll be a planning commission next week. And then we are trying to schedule a city council rules committee work session as well. We as a task force will come back together in March for the deep dive, the next level of detail and specificity. And again, go through the same process of commission, council, afterwards, outreach, and the whole time. The goal is, the objective is that we are able at each point to come to agreement so we can move to the next phase. The culmination will be in May, where we go before the council and the planning commission. So that's ambitious, but I think we can, watching all of you work, I think we can make it. Next slide, please. We've all talked about the amount of work that everyone has done, but I think it's hard to realize these projects, a project like this in another city is a $250,000, $300,000 project. And I don't use those terms loosely. The reason we're going forward with it is because whether it's the co-chairs who have just given a tremendous amount of time, the individuals that you'll all see today who have been leading the stakeholder groups, all the stakeholders who at a 5:15 p.m. on a Friday afternoon are on the phone with each other and with me. So there've been surveys, there've been the working team sessions, there've been the stakeholder interviews and work groups, but the end result of all of your work is what you're going to hear today, and that is a strategic approach to the waterfront and to the maritime districts. You're going to hear common themes from each of these presentations. You're going to hear priorities, a little bit different from one group to the other, but throughout it, you're going to hear a balancing and consideration of other interests. So with that said, 4 groups. I want to kick it off with Wendy O'Sullivan and the Waterfront Access Group. After that, you will be hearing from the Strengthening the Maritime Industry Group. Patrick Shaughnessy will kick it off. After that, Vic will kick it off with residents' expectations. And then we will have Scott Tinkler and Cardi kick off contributing uses. Next slide, please. Waterfront Access, Wendy, to you.
Good morning, all. Great to see you. Wendy O'Sullivan, I'm the superintendent for the National Park Service Chesapeake Bay office. I'll just say that it really has been this great team to work on, our work group. We've really honed in and focused on the importance of water access, both by the water, near the water, and on the water. And we've really kind of scaled up and thought about it holistically, and taken this view of how can public access, waterfront access be an underlying premise here that supports the overall industry and maintains and helps convey the authentic nature of Annapolis. And, you know, I really appreciated reading some of the parts from the landscape report, because our group did focus on how a vibrant and sort of purposeful connections to the water can be achieved. There already are these existing key anchor places within the area of the maritime districts, with City Dock and the future of role for Burtis House, the existing connection with the Maritime Museum and the Ellen Moyer Park being sort of these anchor locations. We did a lot of thinking about how to empower people to explore the diverse sites, businesses, and experiences that help convey that power of place, help connect people to the past, the present, and the future of the maritime focus for Annapolis. You know, and it is about acknowledging what we have and really starting to map and understand our existing points of connection, looking for where there are gaps, and then elevating it all so that the broader public, both our local residents that are within a bike ride, walking distance, and our millions of visiting public, know about and can connect to the water better. And, you know, so it's been this really great conversation. You're going to hear the different pieces that we're bringing forward as recommendations. And what I'll say just from the National Park Service, we're excited to be part of this. I stand ready to bring some technical and financial assistance to move, in particular, the public access recommendations forward. You're going to hear about some planning efforts that we think we need to engage in, and just to a general sense that the National Park Service intends to stay here and be part of Annapolis for, you know, for years to come. We're working with the mayor and his team on a new agreement between the Park Service and Annapolis for Annapolis to be a Chesapeake Gateway community, really being the primary entry point to the Chesapeake and all the connections that brings. And so we talk about the Park Service being in the forever business. And so we're excited to really become part of the community here in Annapolis and bring our forever business to help activate and connect Annapolis with its remarkable waterfront.
Wendy, thanks so much. It's always terrific to hear you. And now the next slide, and Bob Waldman.
Well, I was tasked to understand some better the interrelationship of private land ownership and public access. And there's so much of the waterfront is in private hands that what I think we realized is that there must be a system in place to make that public access possible that Wendy talked about. One of the things that their issue, of course, is sort of the interrelationship between public access and what happens on private lands, and also the issue of liabilities that arise, because they can be quite expensive and difficult. And one of the things that that I came across is something called the Maryland Recreational Use Statute, which could become an important tool in connection with that system that I think we have in place, and which I think we're going to refresh, namely that system of triggers and incentives that the private landowner can take advantage of, so as to increase that landowner's flexibilities and yet maintain the stability of the maritime industry. But let me talk about this statute a little bit because it might become useful for some of you private landowners and might become useful for the public as well. What this statute says is that any property which is used freely without price or without fees for recreational or educational use, that the standard of care that the landowner owes to the visitor on the property drops significantly from, and I'm going to use legal terms, from that of an invitee to that of, well, a trespasser, but that's just a legal term. The standard of care is significantly different for the invitee or the invited guest, say the restaurant customer. It's a standard of care, the negligent standard of care, which is pretty high. You can't have done anything negligently or be negligent. Whereas the standard of care that's applied to, in this case, under the recreational use statute, is that of a trespasser, which is that you need only not do something willfully and malicious to create a danger or an injury. I think that you private landowners might consider talking to your insurance agents and to your attorneys. And when I return in a month or so, I think I should have some better ideas from having consulted just informally with some land use attorneys around town. But you might consult with them to determine if this is an advantage. And what I can foresee is that if the landowner very clearly marks, signs where people can go and where they can't go, that within those areas, the recreational use statute would apply and your liabilities would be considerably less. And that you can design your properties in some ways to make them accessible to the public. And as we later in the next slide, we'll give you some examples of what those things can be and how they can be used inside the trigger system that we have. So let's in fact go to the next slide and take a look at that. Next slide, please. Are those the magic words? So what we think of is
this slide, Bob, goes to I thought it was going to go to Mike. But did you want to talk to this slide?
Well, I would like to. He may have something further to add.
Okay.
But I would like to, because when we talk about how to make access possible within the existing system so as to stabilize it even more so, here are some examples of what could be done to increase your percentage of non-maritime uses. A new street end park, or connecting up perhaps what you have as a promenade or as part of your existing slip infrastructure. If you connect it with a street end park, then you might get a bump in your percentage of non-maritime use. Certainly a broad promenade or a waterfront walkway is a very valuable public access point. If you go further and provide, say, paddle boat access, a launching ramp, that could be, worth a bump for sure. Providing more water taxi stops, because as we foresaw it, as we discussed with Wendy, through the Burtis House, if that becomes a significant water taxi, headquarters, that a person could get all around the waterfront in Annapolis through the water taxis. Providing that, clearly demarcating where people can go, what the walkway is to the water taxi, where they can and what the boundaries are, that should be worth a bump. And then we also came up with, in some circumstances, specifically in Eastport, some properties might be amenable to providing shared parking for restaurants and more further inland, and that would reduce the amount of on-street parking pressure that Eastport residents clearly feel. So these are just some examples of what can be done within the existing trigger system that we have, and that we will be moving on to.
Bob, thanks so much. I need, because to stay on schedule, I need
20 seconds
Mike.
more. I will be able to provide some links for those who are interested in sort of a broad primer on this recreational use statute, and of course, the citation to the statute itself to make your lives easier. And I think I'm within my time now.
You had 2 minutes. Next slide is for Mike and Alice and Amy. Next slide, please.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Tomasini. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, I'm going to try and start my video. I have spotty internet where I am, so I hope I don't freeze. I think what we've been talking about in our group mainly is how important the waterfront access is, and in what ways the city and the landowners in the maritime districts can help bring that to the forefront, make it kind of the most important thing. And I think that the city has this really great network. One of the things that we talked about, this really great network of street end parks, and that the one thing that might be missing is the inventory of how it is exactly that they work. Some street end parks are great as a kayak launch or a spot to jump on a paddleboard and get out onto the water. Others are a really good digging landing close to some, a cup of coffee or something like that. And then there are others that are really good places to go fishing or crabbing or whatnot. And I think the inventory of that and the cataloging of that is part of what Wendy said. It's part of the empowerment is to educate people what these places could be really good for and how the uses work. So, and then on the side note, it was 2 slides back, we were talking about liability issues for property owners. And one of the things that we've discussed in my group, and it's one of the things that I know a little bit about as a maritime operator, is that if there's a tenant on the property that is kind of it's not a full shield, but it's a limit on your liability as a property owner if you have a tenant that has liability coverage for bringing people onto the property. So in my business, I take people from the surrounding area and bring them to Cardi's property and walk them down her dock and put them on my boat. And as part of that, my company has to carry what's called a gangway and ticket extension. And what that, my insurance then covers me not only from the space that's inside the rails of my boat, but also the ability of people to get down to the boat. And I think that policy is fairly standard in a marine policy. And it's something that, is a pretty good liability reduction. I think that's all I've got.
Great. Alice and Amy, would you like to add something?
I would like to
This
add.
is Alice.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Alice. You first.
Oh, okay. Well, I actually think Mike covered sort of our my reflections as well. The only other thing we wanted to mention is in these water access points, we need the proper architecture infrastructure for people to access. And I wanted to use the real life example of the National Park Service funding in part a Deepwater Pier over at the Ellen Moyer Park. That's essential to us for several reasons. Number one, education. Our oyster cages don't work in shallow waters. Number two, it's a place for fishing and pier. People can pull up their boats. And ultimately, we'd love to keep our skipjack Wilma-Lee there. So that really applies to all the water access points, because I do think that we really remarked on how some of the street end parks are almost perceived as private property, and what can we do to let people know that they are welcome, to traverse it.
Great, thank you. Amy?
Yes, sorry, I have a coughing fit. The last thing that we were tasked with doing was talking about protecting, excuse me, the existing waterfront access, mostly owned by the city and the county schools over at Bates, and looking for mechanisms to protect those into the future. And there are easements that the city and the county could investigate that would protect those properties like Truxton Park and like the street end park, so that they could not be developed, and they would be, excuse me, they'd be protected as as natural sites, and it would go with the deed. There's a something called the Declaration of Restrictions Covenant, which we will be investigating, and which many land trusts have used with city property and county property in order to protect that water access, mostly for our residents who use those public sites right now, like the smaller areas which are not as visible to the public. Thank you.
Thanks so much. As you can see, whether it was the legal work Bob did or the research everyone else has done, this group is really moving forward with a comprehensive strategy. I'd like now to move to Patrick, who will be kicking off the challenges facing the maritime industry. Next slide, Eric. And let's go, this is the actions for a strong industry. Let's go to Patrick's slide. Patrick, next.
Right, so the fact is that over recent history, the Annapolis maritime industry has been shrinking. And we can consider probably a couple contributing trends there. One is a shift from smaller businesses towards larger conglomerates, and the other one is relocation. So a small mass manufacturer on Severn Ave struggles to compete with a global manufacturer, and they fold. Or a manufacturer of boats on Back Creek moves its construction to a contract building facility in a lower tax state. And both of these examples are regrettable because we could have avoided them then, and we can probably avoid them now. In either case, we lost. And we can't afford to keep losing because we're on the wrong side of what feels like a critical mass to sustain our local industry. So land values increase, business costs increase, and so our combined overhead is up. And this is particularly true in the really desirable waterfront locations where the districts are located. And on average, a maritime business is a particularly low margin business. And if we combine relatively low margins, high overheads, and we're small businesses competing with very little local support, we have a real perfect storm sort of scenario. And that's turned into a really challenging environment for us to operate in. And together we've arrived in this task force because we have a shortage of maritime tenants in maritime zones. But we can't really short-sightedly treat the symptom of that vacancy. We have to confront the actual problem of local maritime health, or we'll just be meeting again and again to keep treating the symptoms we have. So our local industry needs all of the protection and support that we can give it. And to be honest, this town hangs its hat on maritime, so we need to do everything we can within our power to support it. And if we're honest about the decline, we can agree with each other that whatever we've been doing isn't good enough. We certainly can't turn around and do less. So we can't weaken any protections that we have for maritime industry. We have to maintain the districts, and we have to make a substantial effort to improve the health of the local industry. Because if we successfully improve the root health of the industry, we will have treated the symptom of vacancy in hand. And if we're trying to stem the shrinking of the local maritime industry, the core fact is we can't afford to lose any more of the businesses we have. The reality is that the global maritime industry isn't shrinking. In other places, it's really healthy and it's growing. And our businesses are being actively recruited to move to other really progressive areas because they see value in maritime industry and they're willing to take steps to secure them. And those kind of efforts include rent assistance, deferred taxes, and other really substantial financial support. So we have to take steps to ensure that our local businesses are healthy and provide them the same kind of generous support. We have to ensure that our terms are as good as the ones that are being offered by their other suitors. We have to employ the same tactics that are being used against us. We need to build our industry through recruitment. We have to commit to supporting the businesses, and the businesses have to grow in order to help us together as a community achieve growth. So just wrapping up on those points, I'd say that we know in our hearts that small shops struggle to survive when they compete against the buying power of big global corporations. So in turn, we say that we have to shop local, we have to dine local, because we know we need to be part of our solution. We have to commit like this to our local maritime industry. And on the commercial side, rent and taxes and financial support are hard, but it's only hard. In our world, we tend to think about creativity as something about art and music, but if we're being really honest, creativity is just the power to solve problems. And so some of this stuff's going to take real, genuine creativity. We have to look at them like they're not impossible. We can't say we don't have a mechanism to do that, or that we have to retreat and give something up. In my opinion, we have to all back up as a group and really commit to saying we will solve the problems.
Patrick, terrific as always. I think, John, you're next, aren't you?
Yeah, can everybody hear me? I think so. I'm John Stefanchek. I'm past president of the Marine Trades Association, and I'm the publisher at Chesapeake Bay Media. We've got a real opportunity here. We've had tremendous growth in boating. Across North America, it was a 12% increase last year. That's the largest increase in almost 20 years, along the lines of other outdoor activities. But this is our huge opportunity. So with that increase is we've got a chance for other businesses to come in and help grow the foundation of what we've got going on here. And a key to the growth has really been the maritime zoning districts, because it's made it affordable in some cases for businesses to grow here and thrive here. I remember, I always use the example of when Jeanneau America came to town. That was the first international boat manufacturer of its size to be based here, at least in my memory, which it's about 40 years or so. But as far as that's one thing good that has happened. We got to keep this going. Back to what Patrick said, we have to commit to keep this going, and it keeps Annapolis well positioned as a place not only for the industry, but then it also brings in recreational boaters and visitors from other parts of the region and throughout the world. The thing that drives this is that there's always something that can be done here for them, and that is interesting for them to visit here. These visiting boaters who come throughout the Mid-Atlantic region, who come throughout the world, they want different things. Some cases they want the same things. Everybody might have also noticed the huge growth of mega yachts. All you got to do is look out the window, right? And you see more mega yachts anchored there than we've have in, say, 10 years ago. They also need services. So if we maintain maritime districts, if we commit to the industry, then we can add other services. We can put things back that aren't here anymore, like provisioning. You want to go out for a week, at least in my house, my selling point was, look, here's all the food. And we can go out on the boat for the week. We don't have a bona fide provisioner right now. We don't have a grocery store within walking distance. It's maybe walking distance for some, but things like that. You also can look out the window and see lots of boat slips. So anybody that's not a full-time boater, they might say, oh, well, we've got the slips. That's just part of the puzzle. We have to continue to offer services. And we have to generally speaking, service facilities are at a working boatyard. That doesn't mean that the most of what they're doing is sanding paint. Okay, services, boats are much more complex than they were even 15 years ago. We have to have room for services in working boatyards. Can I have the next slide, please?
Next slide.
There we go. I might have said this the last time we were all together. You might, Annapolis, Maryland, and the Chesapeake in general has some things going for it that no other place really does. And one of that is number of boating facilities, number of marinas and boat yards. There's about 450 marinas on the Chesapeake Bay. That's roughly the number, a little bit more than the number that are coastally accessible from New Jersey to Maine. And that has to do with the property that's here, because they were pretty much all developed by families or individual businesses. So that's why we have so many of them. That's one of the reasons why Anne Arundel County boasts more registered boats in the state of Maryland than any other county. That's one reason why things have come here. Like this is where the world's largest sailboat show was born. And that's why the boating industry is a $3.5 billion industry and has, in Maryland, employing more than 13,000 individuals. It's also one of the reasons why the state of Maryland identifies the Chesapeake Bay as the #1 reason why visitors come here. It's not necessarily seafood. It's not necessarily just being in the outside environment. It's the Chesapeake Bay. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that boating, it's an escape for some people. It's something you can dream about. It's something you can sit in your office in the coldest week of the year and think about what I'm going to do when I get back out on the water. Boating is an attractive thing, whether you're doing it or not, actually. So let's see. Annapolis as a maritime center, we already talked about the districts and how well they serve our low margin business, right? And we're in a boom cycle right now, which means there's going to be a bust cycle. So businesses need to count on predictably lower rent so they can make it through, so they can make plans now, continue with the boom, and be able to recover in the bust cycle. And that's why I'm on this committee, was to work with the city and other landowners to keep the maritime districts in one way, shape, or form. Patrick spoke earlier about bringing back manufacturing. You know, there used to be full-time boat building companies in the city of Annapolis. That's no longer the case on the scale. And not only are other parts of the world and other parts of the country, but there's other places on the Chesapeake Bay who are recruiting our marine services and our boat yards and our boat dealerships. So we're dealing with other places that are nearby in some cases. But if we commit to doing this, if we commit to having to keeping the marine marketplace in the city, we'll keep those companies because they'll see the people coming. We talked a little bit about in one of our breakout groups about having an Annapolis made. And Patrick, I'll bring up your name again. He had an excellent example of designing a boat that's from here and marketed here and used here. I think that's an excellent idea. Something that we could get to is actually having an Annapolis made boat. We do have one. We have Weaver Boat Works markets the Eastport 32. Boston Whaler markets they used to market an Eastport line, but we can do that with something that's made right here. Can I have the next slide, please? I think you're going to see part of this with the Annapolis, with the redevelopment of City Dock, but the more things that we can put within walking distance of boaters is a good thing, not only for people who are coming here from around the world, but for people who are coming by water regionally. It gives them reason to come back to Annapolis time and time again if they can go get a cup of coffee where they can buy something for their boat or their friends who came with them. Restaurants are part of that solution. Restaurants go hand in glove with marinas. So you can see from the list there, those are the kinds of things that we need to encourage close together. and it takes available real estate to do it. So what we've got Annapolis as the crown jewel. I see it as the reason why people are coming to the Chesapeake. We need to keep it that way, but it's not going to stay that way without active participation by all, and that plays into our maritime districts. So I'll hand it off to Stephen Rice.
Thank you. So if we're going to raise the profile of the maritime industry in Annapolis, there are a couple of things that we can do. We can create an attractive website, and we can launch a social media campaign. And we also need to start attending maritime conferences to try to recruit some businesses to the city. And in fact, if Annapolis creates a maritime industry group, that would actually help with not only advocacy efforts, but also programming efforts. A regional blue technology collaborative could be helpful in facilitating a movement in that direction, because blue technology has been dubbed as a growth industry within the maritime sector. And I think what we really want in the end is that we want Annapolis to be a place where there's buzz. And if we can create the buzz, then maritime businesses will actually want to be here, because they'll want to be a part of something special. So I think that's the end game for all of us. If we can create the right buzz, then we won't have as many challenges with respect to filling up space. We won't have as many challenges when it comes to margins, and it will provide the impetus for the entire industry within the Annapolis community to grow. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. It's Susan Zellers here. So from this process, the group worked very hard considering a lot of different options and finally built a consensus, which is what we're all aiming to do here. What we heard loud and clear from this group was that they're very proud of the maritime industry as it is. It sort of started with not wanting to do anything to change it because it's a great industry. We're afraid of losing it. But as you can see from this presentation, this group worked to build a consensus on some of the options that we do have and some of the things we can do to strengthen the industry. So the uses, most of all, must support the health of the maritime industry. In other words, no uses like dentists or lawyers or things like that that are not contributory to supporting this maritime industry. Residential, no matter how you look at it, is just not compatible with maritime industries. The smell of the maritime industry or the traffic from the maritime industry, and it's very difficult to be compatible with maritime. Restaurants, on the other hand, are very contributing to the uses of working yards. They service the slip holders. They keep the slip holders coming back. They service transient boaters and workers in the yard, and it's a wonderful combination to have. And all of these things, as I pointed out, the first part of this is that they have to contribute to the health, so that there have to be triggers in place that allow for these things, these non-maritime uses, to be part of the districts. So that kind of wraps it up from the industry's perspective. I'd like to just take a minute and thank the whole team: John Stefanczyk, John Norton, Jen Flake, Mary Ewenson, Sally Ruther, Kevin Ryman, Patrick Shaughnessy, Mike Tomasini. Those contributions were really important to this presentation. Thank you.
Susan, thanks so much. And I also just wanted to share the last slide, which Scott Tinkler will talk about in his presentation as well, about easing the permitting process. Terrific. The next group we're going to hear from, or the group of the residents, let's move to Vic Pasco.
Okay, can we see the next slide? Good morning, everyone. I'm Vic Pasco. I live in Eastport. I've lived here for 22 years, and it's a pleasure to be on this committee. The people who live here came to Eastport specifically, and probably to Annapolis, because of the combination of the maritime industry and residential living. We are a one-of-a-kind place to live. We have the boating industry, the maritime industry is right outside of our door, and that's what people love about living here. They certainly want to see the maritime industry survive. They realize that a critical mass is necessary to keep that survival, and folks are very open to that. Definitely, we don't want to see the waterfront redeveloped. We don't want to see it walled in. We don't want to see condominiums and things like that, and I think that's already been addressed. The residents are definitely in favor of uses that support and contribute to the maritime industry. They want to be able to take their boats close by to have work done. They want to be able to get gasoline quickly and easily. Those are important to the residents. Increased access to the water is a big deal. We know that there's been recent conversation about some developments that have gone on that have closed off access to the water. We'd like to see the city make it so that there is better access to the water for all residents and the public. Can I see the next slide, please? We do agree that restaurants that subsidize or support boat yards are acceptable. It's important that the restaurants don't replace or displace maritime uses. I think everyone kind of understands what that means. We don't want restaurants to dominate the waterfront, because if they do, it'll get rid of everything that we use, the boating industry that we typically use. We'd like to see, if restaurants come on board, that they be in areas where there's parking available, because the big issue here has always been parking and traffic. We're almost at a tipping point as it is, and so we'd like to see, if restaurants are going to be part of the mix, that there's parking included with that. And of course, we talked about triggers, and I don't need to go over that again. I think that's it on my slide. We'll go to Mike Tomasini now.
Thanks, Vic. I think you covered a lot of it. And anybody who lives in or speaks with residents, specifically in Eastport, and I'm sure in a lot of places downtown, parking and parking infrastructure is a big part of this. So our group, when we met with the residents who were on this task force, we thought that this was a real opportunity to address just some kind of long-term blocking and tackling, fundamental basics for the public works side of things, to clean up some things here in Eastport that would make parking issues less prevalent. And we sat together on a group a couple of years back, Vic and I and Cardi Templeton and some other residents and business owners in Eastport specifically, and came up with a good, thorough list of things that we could do to ease parking pressures on the residents in Eastport. And I think that's, this is an opportunity to really grab onto that and take care of some of those issues and be able to move forward. From the next slide, I think. From the water access side, I think, if anybody was on Ross's town hall last night, they would have heard a lot of residents who were concerned about losing what was once water access points. I think it's really important that we maintain those, try and keep what we have, enhance what we do have, and do a better job of maintaining it. In discussions with the harbor master, it's been brought up that there are a lot of waterway improvement grants and a lot of funds that are going to go into improving access at street end parks, which I think is, really remarkable, that we're going to be able to use some grant funding to improve those properties and get more people on the water. And I think that's where the residents stand on this. And keep what we have, enhance what we need to use in a diverse way.
Thanks so much, Mike and Vic. Terrific job. I'd like now to move to Scott Tinkler. And all of our good thoughts this morning should be with Rod Jabin and his family as they recover from COVID. Scott, 2 slides.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Scott Tinkler, Report Annapolis Marina. Just a little history on me. I've been here at the marina for 38 years. The reason I mention that is I've experienced and seen firsthand a huge change in the marine industry, how people use their boats, how people use the facilities. The way people boat today and the way they boated 25 years ago is totally different. A lot of people will come to the facility, they'll use the facility as a home away from home. They'll go out for the day, come back, maybe go downtown, enjoy the property, picnic, and use it in that way. It's not just a place to hang your dock lines anymore. So in that regard, right now in the WMI, there's only a deli allowance, and that's for a very limited amount of seating. And today's clients really are asking or require, a little bit more than that. Something larger than a deli, but not a chart house type restaurant. I think there's room for something in between that would be functional, not really change the operation at all, but offer the clients that come and go a little bit more service. It could also, have some kind of options for, provisioning, and maybe even, have some kind of an outside bar type thing at a pool or adjacent to the marina. And these things could have, restrictions on, how late they're able to be open, maybe seasonally, so that it's not over, burden to the community that these marinas sometimes are nestled in. I believe that, these type things are what today's customers are looking for. And it's, the newer boaters are boating in a much, much different way than they did when their fathers and fathers boated. So it's needed in our industry. There are allowances for this in other zones, and it creates, a little bit of an unbalanced field in that regard. And I think the facilities that, have the space, the parking, the property to do it, it could be done in a way that would be almost not change the operation at all. So, and then moving forward with the pavilion, did you want me to talk about that too, Eileen? Yeah.
Let's move to the next slide. Why don't you touch on it, and then Cardi will pick up from where you leave off.
Yeah, and then, moving forward, outdoor venues is another. If you have the property space, the parking, an outdoor venue type is another way to draw people, to the area, to, bring people not just from Annapolis, but from all around the bay down to the facility. I'm sure a lot of you know that we have this type of venue, an outdoor venue, and, the Marine Trades does functions here, Alliance for the Chesapeake does, lots of, nonprofit organizations. One thing that I'm frequently astounded by when we have a function, you'll come across people frequently that live in Annapolis or live in Anne Arundel County, been here their whole lives, and they'll say, "Oh, I never knew it was this nice down here. I never knew there was this perspective around here." And I hear that so frequently. So it's so many people don't even get the opportunity to get down to the water. So it's also a way to help people get to the water and see what there is to offer. Even people who live here every day. So it is a nice building block, a nice feature for continuing to grow boating, getting people out on the water, getting people to the water, as well as servicing your current customer base.
Thanks so much, Scott. Cardi?
Keying on exactly what Scott has said, the more that we can create boaters, the more business there will be for the maritime industry, the more this will keep and strengthen our critical mass of the industry. And even taking a step closer to what Bob Waldman was saying and a step before what Scott was saying, anything you can do, we can do to get people a chance to see the water, be near the water, at some point get on the water, spend more time on the water, enjoy their time before and after boating is what we need to be doing. That can even be, I mean, certainly going to a restaurant from which you can see the water is part of that experience. Being able to maybe do some yoga in an area by the water. Then maybe you're doing yoga out on the water on a sup. And if we could get to the next slide, please. I think that what we've got going on Back Creek, right, particularly WMI, we need to strengthen and build. What we have going on Spa Creek is a little bit different already in that we have access, we have less of the hard maritime repair your boat, manufacture your boat. We have more of your come to look at the boat you may want to buy, come to charter a boat that you might take out for the weekend, come to finance the boat that you may be buying, come to find an inflatable. We also have a fair amount of come and take a fishing trip with your kids for 2 hours to learn about spot and rockfish. We have go out on a pirate adventure. We have rent a kayak. We have rent a sup. We have come on the water taxi. We have walk to downtown. How do we make sure we continue to do those things and we continue to offer those things while also making sure that the finances work to keep our buildings in good shape and offering space? We make sure that we keep the triggers that we have for any non-maritime at all. To take a half a step back, non-maritime here in WMM allows us to keep the buildings in working order and offer space to the industry. We're missing a fueling station, or we will be if we can't make the numbers work. So that's the idea of adding a trigger there. Also, I think whatever we can do to incent more water access would be a way to ensure that it continues to be offered, despite the fact that it may bring more parking hassles or more liability. Examples of that, water taxi access, rentals, anything that you can do to allow people to get out on the water for under $100 or under $150, right? Scott talked about how people are boating differently. One of the things that's happening is people are not owning a boat, but they're going out on a schooner Woodwind, or they're taking a sunset cruise with the schooner Liberté. And all of that will get us more boaters, which will get us more demand, which will get us more strength in the industry. If we could go to the next slide, or maybe it's the previous slide. It's the previous slide. The one thing I would like to mention that is a factor in WMM that I think may be useful as we're looking at other changes, other places. Restaurants in WMM, the square footage can be offset by hard maritime, boat storage, boat display, boat manufacturing, repair and maintenance. Those are things that aren't as prevalent in WMM, but part of why they are here is because they are encouraged as an offset to the restaurant. And I say offset just that the restaurant not count towards a non-maritime percentage. So doing things like that where one trigger supports something else that we really want, a concept for us to keep in mind as we go forward. Is John Arison up next with parking?
Yes, John Arison, and the next slide.
Yeah, hi, Eileen, thank you. The reason why we're here with this task force is because some of us have been working for the last couple of years to try to change maritime professional office percentages with triggers like a fuel dock to help Annapolis City Marina out. And rather than just look at Annapolis City Marina, Ross and the mayor decided that we needed a task force to look at in more depth at maritime issues. it's called dynamic tension. To solve a problem, you have to create a crisis. So that's sort of where we got. But in looking at trying to increase percentages of professional office in return for maintaining a fuel dock, for example, we found that in the WMM zone, the parking requirement for professional offices is 1 space per 200 square feet of professional office, non-maritime. Whereas in the entire rest of the city, it's 1 space per 300 square feet. Having that greater standard for parking really doesn't make any sense, because an attorney office or an accountant or whatever on Severn Avenue has got the same parking demand as the same use on West Street. So we started looking to change that. What that does is, for the uses in the WMM zone, it requires so much parking for the uses, extraneous parking, that there's no room to provide public parking to take some of the pressure off of the streets of Eastport. But then in looking into this a little bit more, and I think that I'm glad that Cardi went before I had an opportunity to speak, because you heard her talking about all the different ways to get people on the water. Now, if you were to, for example, try to say we have to have so much parking for the kayakers, we have to have so much parking for weekend, you would just have so much pavement on the water, it'd be ridiculous. So what in some of the other zones, the WMI zones, for example, with the boat yards and all they want is flexibility to manage the parking on their sites day to day and hour to hour as different uses change on weekends, rather than having to go through a cumbersome process. And this goes to regulatory reform too, of having to go and write a shared parking agreement every time somebody decides that they want to have a use there that only happens on Sundays or whatever. I think it's kind of flexibility like that is easy to understand. It's difficult to codify, but that's what we're looking at trying to do, is to find a way to grant maritime property owners greater flexibility in the day-to-day with the day-to-day operations and how the parking is going to be managed. And then the other thing is, and this is especially true, you have to understand the WMI zones over off Edgewood Road, they can do a lot of stuff without impacting neighborhoods, because those uses aren't in neighborhoods. The WMM zone and the WME are in the Eastport neighborhood, and what they do would impact residents. But there's also opportunities with these uses to provide evening parking. For example, Annapolis City Marina has given out between 75 or 100 passes for restaurant employees during this pandemic in order to try to get those cars off the street. And there's because there's a definite conflict. A lot of the restaurants in Eastport are grandfathered for parking, which means they don't have any parking. So there's opportunities, if you can incentivize the property owners, to have them use their parking to solve some of the other issues that impact the residents at different times of the day. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at changing the professional office parking requirement, giving greater flexibility for property owners to manage their properties, and to try to incentivize property owners to use their parking to try to get rid of some of the adverse impacts of other uses in neighborhoods.
John, terrific. Thanks. Next slide. And I'd like to turn this over to Terry Lomax. I'm ahead of myself. Scott, we're going back to you to quickly mention the streamlining. You did such a terrific job. No good deed goes unpunished. You get to talk again.
Yeah, no problem. So along with the bullet points that are on the screen there, I'd like to add a couple thoughts and ideas. First of all, obviously during this past pandemic, I think the city's done, yeoman's work to try to keep things going as best they can. I mean, we're all altered our business greatly to keep going. So, hats off to them for that, and appreciate everything they've done. Outside the pandemic, though, there seems like there could be a way to streamline things a little bit. I don't believe or we don't believe that it's the reviewers or the inspectors or the officials. It's more the system that's being used or the guidelines for that system. Many times permits are gotten or in kind or close to in kind, or they're for repairing an aging facility, and they're not really changing the operation of the facility at all. It's just, you know, upgrading from what we had. And it seems like those things, if we could give the people making the decisions some tools to help the process, I think it would streamline it a lot. Now, if you're going in to, you know, redevelop your property and change it greatly, that's different. I mean, that obviously needs a little bit more oversight and attention, but you know, simple things could go down a different path, and maybe, I mean, that would certainly help facilities keep up with their maintenance. I mean, you know, facilities, they're not getting younger. So it's, and I don't know, you know, being on my managing my own property, I don't have a good feel for all the acts that the permit office is dealing with. I'm sure it's a tremendous amount every day. So I'm just saying that maybe there's a path on some of these easier projects. It could go on a little bit different path and be seen a little, you know, a little quicker.
And Scott, those are the same comments that were also in the Maritime Industry Group's comments. Yeah. Thanks very much. Let's go to the next slide, and Terry Lomax. Terry?
There we go. Thank you, Eileen. It's been refreshing to hear everyone before me speak, because I think it reflects that there is a consensus, at least on the number of major issues and to help the industry. And our group, which is really going to be the nuts and bolts, I think, of the actual uses that come into play with the conditions, et cetera. We broke into a subgroup, and that subgroup importantly had Will Scott, who's not only a city resident, but a longtime member of the Planning Commission and past chair of the Planning Commission, where the next step will be with this project. We had Pete McDevitt from Ward 1, who is a local boater and a very important component because he is actually a hard maritime user of services in the city. And then we have myself, who I'm a resident of Ward 8, but I also chair the Maritime Advisory Board, and I've been a longtime boater and maritime user in the city. And to Pat Shaughnessy's point about the change in the industry, the maritime zones, the 4 maritime zones, WMC, WME, WMI, and WMM, are 33 years old. They were enacted in 1987. And with the one limited exception of 110 Compromise Street, there has been no change. There's been no substantive review. There has been no change. And when WMM brought John put it, I think, a crisis to the forefront, and Ross, to his credit, recognized that we can't deal with this in isolation, and this is a citywide, city multi-zone review. And we began to take this as a comprehensive review, and this task force came together. The overarching goals I share on the nuts and bolts side with what everybody's been saying. It's critical that we get consensus among the stakeholders, the property owners, the tenants, and the residents. We all have, it doesn't have to be unanimous, but it does have to be a consensus on where we're going. The second thing I think is equally important is we have to provide achievable recommendations for existing and new uses in maritime zones. That doesn't mean every use and every concept that somebody comes up with needs to be included. We need to be able to achieve them. We have an opportunity after 33 years to affect meaningful change that supports the maritime industry, meets the goals of public access, access to the water, growth of the industry, but we have to be realistic and keep them to achievable goals. If we don't keep them to achievable goals, it's too easy for the city to simply say, take it up in the comprehensive plan or elsewhere. But we have an opportunity now to achieve goals that will really help the industry. So where did we come up with some ideas? Well, there's 3 main sources of ideas that actually have been bandied about today and talked about today, but they come from a variety of sources. When Mayor Gavin Buckley took office, he commissioned a transition team, and there was a maritime component to that transition team with solid recommendations. We also have looked at how other maritime jurisdictions handle their maritime uses. Most of them do not have the multi-zone systems that we have, but we looked at other zones in maritime communities just to see how things were being handled there. And then we have a list that has been sort of accumulated on the back of a notepad by me and others on the Maritime Advisory Board of uses, changes, tweaks that have come about over the years that have been percolating, waiting for this opportunity to be put into play. So let's go to slide 2 and talk about the process. So the process starts with the existing code, and the existing code, section 2148040, is the nuts and bolts of what you can do, not do, and under what terms and conditions you can do it in a maritime zone. And if you went and look at that table of uses, it's basically an Excel spreadsheet. You've got 4 zones in one column, and you've got all these uses down the side. And some are permitted with standards, some are special exceptions. There is this whole mishmash of terms, conditions, uses on this in this table. So what did we do? The first thing we wanted to do was really align those uses with, and new uses, with the concepts that Eileen has sort of broadly put out, and that is there are what we call permitted uses. Those are the hardcore maritime uses, boat repair, boat sales, the kinds of things that are sort of a no-brainer as that these are maritime uses. Then we looked at the contributing uses, and this is where things like restaurants come into play. As previous speakers have said, a restaurant associated with a marina is a huge attraction for visiting boaters. It's a huge attraction for the visiting public who now have access of sorts to the water, views, outside dining. They are probably a major contributing use, but there can be other contributing uses that contribute to the experience of the maritime user, but also contribute to the success of the maritime business. The third category is what we categorize as a compatible use. The classic example, the compatible use that currently exists in WMM is non-maritime office building, office use. It is not a maritime use. A doctor's office is not a maritime use. It's not particularly contributing maritime use, but it is a use that is compatible with the location in a maritime zone. So these compatible uses are what can be located in one of our maritime zones that is compatible to and not detracting from the contributing or hardcore permitted uses. So with that, we took the first step, and we went through and we have evaluated and categorized the new and potential uses in the current table. And we did so without regard to any conditions, standards, or triggers. We know they have to come. There are current uses have conditions, standards, triggers. We know new uses are going to require conditions, standards, triggers. We know there's going to be things like incentives. But the starting point was, let's just get a table, a spreadsheet that's got everything on it, and then we can get down to the next step. And the next step is going to be to evaluate and recommend those triggers or standards for both the current uses that might need to be changed and also for the new uses. And that's where the other committees are going to play an important role, because we need that input on all these conditions and triggers, whether it be a trigger for a restaurant for having a 20-ton lift, whether it be a trigger for some other use because of water access, whatever those triggers may be are going to be really where the proverbial rubber meets the road. But it's also going to be important that those triggers are by consensus with these other working committees. And let me just conclude that I am both excited and grateful to the mayor, to Alderman Arnett, To Eileen, we finally, after 33 years, and I have been beating this drum for almost those 33 years, and certainly in 2 comprehensive plans, that we are finally making progress in getting a good hard look at these maritime zones and the maritime industry and how we can strengthen it. But I would just want to reiterate, it has to be a consensus, and we have to set realistic goals that we can achieve. Otherwise, we are going to be another 33 years getting to this point again. So I thank the mayor, I thank Alderman Arnett, Eileen, and everybody that's working on this. Let's keep this momentum going.
Terry, thanks so much. Will has a 2-minute wrap-up comment, and then we are going to break out into groups. Will.
I will be brief. So much has been said that I want to thank everybody for all of their thoughtful and articulate comments. As Terry just said, I believe we've reached a compelling consensus because of the hard work of all the people involved. Also because we've all acted, at least all the people I've interacted with, and I'm sure everyone else has acted in good faith, frankly and thoughtfully and clearly, letting everyone else know what their concerns are and what their priorities are. And through all of that discussion, I think everyone has kept in mind the overall welfare of Annapolis, the community at large, the industry, the property owners, the residents, and the visitors to our community. So as Terry said, in much greater detail, we have a very compelling consensus, and now we need to move forward together as a group, working out the individual details with a realistic approach and ensuring that we can move forward into the future with the revisions that are necessary to keep this industry part of Annapolis's future as it has been part of its history. Thank you.
Will, thanks so much. You will see here all of your images from our first meeting because all of you have participated. Now I'm looking at the time. What I'd like to do is ask if you can stay with us till 10 after 12, 10 minutes beyond 12. That will give the breakout groups 25 minutes, which I think is the minimum you need. And then it'll give the co-chairs a few minutes each to report out. The real question for you as you go into these breakout groups is, are we ready to move forward to the next phase to refine these concepts? You've heard a lot of general concepts and you've heard some specifics. So I would ask each of you to take up that challenge to see, can we move to the next stage? And with that, Julian is going to put everyone in your original breakout group, and then I am hopeful that the people who are the floaters that will succeed at letting you float from group to group. Julian, take it from here.
Hey, Julian, you have me in the Keeping Waterfront Open group. Is that correct? I should be in residence, I think. Yep. Thanks.
You are all going to your original working groups. One group is Rod Jabin and Will Scott group that has Patrick, Terry, John Norton, Dick Peterson, Clarence, Pete McDevitt, Eric, Dan Roche, John Hammond. Second group is the group with Mike Tomasini, Vic Pasco, John Stefanchek, Alice Waldman, Jeff Holland, Arison, Amy, Marcellus, Debbie, Sally, and Jeremy Rose. The third group will be Susan Zellers and Scott Tinkler, Cardi, Jeremiah, Kevin, Jen, Jana, Sally, Debbie Dillon, Stephen Rice, Mark Millay.
Yes. Yep.
Eileen, and maybe this is for others to think about also. I was just going to suggest that, it's a natural fit for the MPS to think about funding to support the public access planning. But I also am really interested about the maritime industry and how we sustain that also.
Why don't we see, Wendy, if we can get you in that group right now?
Residents. Okay, can you send the request to me again? Okay.
And I see John Hammond and Fred. John, you should be are you in Rod and Will's group?
I was a floater originally.
Okay, do you want to be a floater? Let me see, I may have put you in that group. Let me see which group you're in.
Well, we all know what floats.
Yep. Okay. Bear. Okay.
And Fred, do you want to be in the water access? I mean, all the groups are mixed, but do you want to be in water access? Do you want to float? Can't hear Fred. Fred, now I can hear you.
You complaining about that?
No, I'm saying, would you like to be in float between groups or be in one group is primarily water access, but they're all gonna talk about the whole thing.
You're floater.
Okay, we will make you a floater.
Wait a minute. I do not. I'm used to being sent to my room. Okay, there it is. Hit join.
Okay, let me see down here. Okay, I think we have everybody live. And one thing that is terrific about living in Annapolis is there's no shortage of opinions. I jump in and out of each of these groups, and I will tell you it was lively in every group. With that said, I'd like to have the co-chairs report out. Vic and Mike, why don't we start with your group?
Mike, you want to go or you want me to?
You can go, Vic.
Okay, so we had a lively discussion, kind of got a little off track on some things, but the basic premise was we want to hold on to what we have and to take an inventory of what we have. We want to maybe enhance what we have with public-private partnerships. We want to see what the perception of the public is to the inventory that we have. And then we went into a bunch of different things of types of water access, land-based, affordable boating, general boating. And Bob Waldman is going to put together a survey for us. I think that's what we called it, Bob. You can help me on that, that we can all fill out to get more in depth on those items.
Terrific, terrific. You guys are so organized. Great. Let me move then to Will Scott.
Thanks. We had a very good discussion about whether what the next step is going to be something focused on our table of uses that was discussed in our presentation earlier, which everybody was in agreement that we would address that and that we had consensus that that was an appropriate next step. But there were very good ideas put forward by one member of the group that I could boil down, and I hope he won't mind me saying, he wants to see action from the city, dollars and cents, really, you know, to help market this, the district, to help build synergy to attract new industries, new businesses. And so it's more of his vision was more concrete than I think some of the things, more expansive than what we're able to do in the current framework that we're working with.
Well, Will, we certainly, and I know I've been in those conversations, I heard part of it, and I agree with both the larger direction, but I also agree with Patrick's comments, and we will be following up within the next week or so to see how we can start taking some action, doing two things at once. Thanks very much. And now we have Susan and Scott.
Great, thanks. So the group consensus was, yes, we're ready to move on to the next phase. And I think that's what you had asked of us. Caution, we want to make sure that we're not lumping zones together. Be sure to address each of the zones individually. Caution, would like to see more incubator and or incentives for businesses, but remembering that we have an immediate issue to get the space filled. So how do we, balance that, make sure that's balanced? And also, as Terry Lomax pointed out earlier, make sure we keep our wants attainable. Make sure that we're moving forward in a way that we can get this through this time. Restaurants, percent of occupancy within the zones, venues, and some expanded uses are all acceptable to the group. And a real desire to be creative to attract another layer of maritime. So some other supportive types of uses, perhaps a category for maritime supportive uses. And that's all.
Susan, terrific. I am just amazed at the co-chairs and I'm amazed at all of the energy and commitment everyone has brought to this. You will be hearing, because we've come up with a lot more work based on your really fruitful discussions today. This coming Thursday, I will be contacting people or would like volunteers to join us with the Planning Commission. So anyone who would like to volunteer, please contact Eric or me. And with that said, I think everyone has agreed. You've stayed a few minutes longer. I think I have the city manager, and I know I have a couple of the council people on. Would any, the manager or any of the council people like to make a closing comment?
I will, Eileen. I have to tell you, I'm very excited about what I've heard today. I understand everybody is a little bit skeptical that this will really lead to something. It is my promise, as the one that put this task force together, that there will be actionable items. I heard an awful lot of things. Some of them may be outside of the scope of the task force, but I really do appreciate the work you're doing, and I find it very exciting, and I'm anxious to move forward.
Terrific. Any other of the council or manager? Well, we have had
Fred. Fred.
Oh, Fred is on. Fred?
Wait a minute.
You're muted, Fred.
Fred? Well, everyone should know Fred wishes us all good work. He thanks us. He was excited. And with that said, is Fred still on?
Still muted.
Okay.
Hit your space bar, Fred.
So the reason I don't have trouble is I come down here and I make Julian do all of this for me. So that's the other solution.
Have your secretary help you.
Okay, Fred, your comments.
I can be an advertisement while we wait. Okay. I just want to say that one kind of paradigm shift in this is to acknowledge that this may be a fluid document, and that we want to prevent this enormous effort and the resulting study to be something that's just put on a shelf. I think we have to have that perspective so that this is a success.
Absolutely. And I would add, Ellie, that with the city doc, it was all geared toward action. And in less than a year from when that plan came forward, city dock is going to be under construction. So with that, I'm giving Fred one more chance.
Hey, the darn thing didn't work. What can I say?
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for this. I really learned a lot, just mostly listening. As a matter of fact, entirely listening. As usual, Ross has spoke enough for the both of us. So have a nice lunch, everybody.
Great. And on that positive comment, again, volunteers for next Thursday, and you will all be hearing from us as we jump into all of the detail that needs to take place in the next phase. Thanks very much. Take care.